Hi, this is David Knack and Derek Potnick from Lean Agile Studio team, and we're back to talking today about product assumptions. Today, our goal is to share with you an understanding of what are product assumptions, some examples of them, what we see as pain points or challenges when we try to utilize some of these product assumptions to build out our digital product offerings. And then we'll kind of tie it together and try to find out some solutions where what offerings can maybe address some of these pain points to address some of these very specific assumption types that we want to achieve to actually make the, I have to pause there. All right. The outcome is making product assumptions that are valid, that are minimized cost, achieve the value with minimal risk. That's the ultimate goal of achieving business outcomes while using product assumptions. All right, so let's start today. So let's start with what are product assumptions? Derek, can you kind of share with you what your definition of product assumptions are and maybe some examples?
Yeah, so product assumptions definitely relate back to the goal of product fit, which, as we know, is one of the six major goals that clients come to Leading Agile to achieve. And so what we're talking about is assumptions that we make about our markets or about the channels that we serve or about the customers that we reach through those channels. That when we build product according to those assumptions, we get potentially a bad fit, right? The product that we make or the service or the solution is not a good fit because we've made assumptions about the customers that it's for or the market that they're in or the channel that we serve them through. So that's what we mean when we talk about product assumptions. And assumptions are something that we do automatically as humans all the time, right? We leap to assumptions, leap to conclusions. It's a shortcut that we take in our decision process, and sometimes it helps us move quickly. But if we don't check those assumptions as we go, that's when we get in danger. So assumptions are not a bad thing at first, but they are a bad thing in the long run if they haven't been checked. What do you think, David? How did I do with that description? What would you add to it?
I think product assumptions are a good starting point. You always have to start with something, saying, here's my hypothesis on this product, and I want to make sure I have the right product fitting the right market needs. And you have to start with some product assumptions and what you think will achieve that business outcome that you want. What's important, though, is to make sure you pause, validate, and ask questions, probing questions to make sure your hypothesis and your product assumptions are valid. And that's what it's critical in making sure we give the product the space to actually ask those questions. I've always said that, do you want to start right, or you want to start fast, or you want to start right? All right. And if you start fast, yes, you're building things, but you have risks. If you start right, you might have a better chance for the right outcome that you want.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you make a good point, right? Especially when you're doing something new, whether in a startup mode or developing a new product or a new market. All you have is your hypothesis initially. And so the whole point of product development at the beginning of that type of endeavor is to learn and to validate or invalidate your hypothesis. And so the assumptions are part of that hypothesis, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when you have established products, assumptions creep in other ways. So can you talk a little bit about where assumptions come from when you have a more established product or portfolio?
Yes, established products usually like, hey, my competitor is doing this. Okay, doesn't mean the customer wants it. All right, that's different. All right, a competitor is doing it doesn't mean the market or the customer wants it. Okay, so sometimes you just follow the person and say, let's build that too to be a me too,
Hmm.
which you don't know what their validation they're done on their end. The other thing I've seen in established products is I've seen this in another vertical or another scenario. This should be really cool, shiny object for my market or my customer. All
Hmm.
right. So you take in experiences that you might think are very valuable and elsewhere and trying to hopefully translate it to your market and customer, which both are very valid. All right. All right.
Yep.
But still back to the same point that you're making a product assumption that this will fit without any type of validation with your customer market that they really care about this. If they're willing to even use it, and even most important, are they willing to pay for it or
Yeah.
give us revenue or some type of benefit, custom business benefit that we want out of this? That's the key. All right.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah.
so
So
what?
the sort of copycat syndrome. It
Yes.
worked for this customer, it'll work for that customer, or it worked for that
Right.
product, and it'll work for this product. Yeah.
Right. And also, I would say sometimes another thing is with established products is that you're jumping ahead. You know, you have a great idea, and maybe it's horizon 2 or 3, which means, hey, this customer, this they would love this, but are they really
Mhm.
ready for it? All
Yeah.
right. So yes, so it's like I might be bleeding edge on something, but do the customers understand it? And if they don't, if they understand the value, then they might be willing to pay for it. Or the whole
Mhm.
goal is to create product features, the customer engagement, and that leads to some type of, business outcome of revenue, expense, or other metrics that you're trying to track to achieve your business strategy. So it's important to not jump ahead of the customer with these long range or futuristic product assumptions. So
Right. Right. Or make too many bets based on assumptions, as opposed to having, sort of your solid foundation that meets the basic expectations of the customer while you're probing the market with some of these hypotheses. Right.
right.
Yeah.
And there's different levels of product assumptions. Like there's the lower risk ones where you're taking an existing feature and maybe iteratively improving it based on some very low bets, small bets.
Hmm.
You got small bets. Okay, so that's okay. Uh, and you have to take that into considerations. But if you're rolling out a new feature on a product that requires uh, not just product development, but then you're talking about operational impact, marketing impact, sales impacts, maybe support impact, because it's touching many different areas within the organization.
Hmm.
You have to be sure that that product assumption is going to achieve that business goal, because you
Right.
are now not just putting at risk your technology team, which is just, yes, you need to pick what the technology team wants to build and release, but now you're impacting other parts of the organization, cost and priorities. So,
Hmm.
so when you think about that, that's probably going to be more of a bigger bet assumption, which I just described, which if you're going to put a big bet on there, you want to make sure you have some validation of that
Yeah.
product assumption and you're not just going out and hoping that it achieves it.
Right. If the product assumption is your foundation that you build lots of process around, or a lot of infrastructure around, and that foundation's not secure, that it can be costly to rebuild.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so not all product assumptions are the same, and that's
Mhm.
best on the bet, but they do have some common characteristics, and there's certain types of product assumptions that are in the marketplace. Could you kind of talk about maybe some types of product assumptions,
Mhm.
examples?
Yeah. So I'll start with a common example, and then I'll see if I can get a specific one in there too. So a common one is that customers or end users want more features, right? They want more choices, and this is something that comes from talking to, it comes from talking to customers potentially, right? You get a lot of requests, and you start to develop the belief that customers want a lot of options, right? A lot of different font choices or a lot of different options on the menu, if you will. And that can lead you to build those things, and it can, in your salespeople can even be a part of that too, quite often, because in sales, if you our product has 20 features and their product has 10, mathematically ours looks better. But oftentimes that flies directly in the face of the actual experience of using the product. That more features or more choices actually discourages people when they go to use the product. They are overwhelmed by choice. They get a little bit of a paralysis, and certainly they get a lot poorer usability typically when there are more choices or more features. So you find this tension, for example, very easily in looking at the Microsoft Office suite, right, and the 700 different features buried in the menus of Microsoft Office versus something like Google Docs or Pages within the Mac environment, right? The bet in Microsoft was on the number of features, and the bet in the other two product families was in the experience of using those products. So that's a common assumption, is that people want more choices or want more features, when actually the research and suggests that people prefer a smooth experience, right? They want just enough features to do what's most important, and then that will suffice for them.
Yeah, I like to add into your statement where you kind of talked about, which is I think critical, it's missed in product assumptions, is you mentioned the source.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And the source is important because the source could be many different ways within an organization. You can have the sales team screaming for some features because they can't sell something because they think that the market's like that, or they're hearing that from their customer, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a source, a valid source. You have it's a source from the customer itself through their feedback sources, surveys, or customer service operations that gives you feedback, through the voice channel or other channels. So it's important to make sure that you capture the source, because how you validate that product assumption is going to be critical of addressing that source. Because if you're addressing against a sales team, they're going to want different information to validate why they could sell more. Because maybe it's more of a B2B customer who maybe it's not the end user of the product. You know, I'm selling a product to someone else to buy, and then maybe an end user is using it. And versus I'm talking to the actual end user. See, so you got a different source of objectives, but at the end of the day, you want to make sure you achieve the end user's goal, not at the expense of internal or external, sales or other source information, because sometimes that gets confusing.
Yeah, so a very tangible example of this was in the past developing library databases for schools and universities. The librarians were our economic buyers, and they made the purchasing decisions. And if you ask a librarian what type of user experience they want, they will tell you they want an advanced search page, right, that can do highly complicated Boolean searches to get just the right keywords or just the right publication dates or the quality of sources. And of course, many of them have advanced degrees to do this. But they are purchasing library databases for high school students who are writing their first research paper, or college students who are writing their first research paper. And those students grew up with Google. And when they see an advanced search page, they will turn and go somewhere else. Because that is not the experience that they want. So you have the advice of the power user kind of creating the assumption about the needs of the intermediate and novice user, which is not going to help you make good product choices. It's not to say that you couldn't include advanced search in the product, but if that is your opening page, you're going to turn off a lot of the core users that the librarians are hoping actually want to use the database. So that was actually how we confronted that assumption when we created those products, was to show metrics to the librarians about the usage of the basic search page versus the usage of the advanced search page, and showing that the students that they cared about were actually as successful with a basic search as they would be with an advanced search.
Right.
Yeah.
And that kind of speaks to, your customers, your end users also are of different levels of sophistication. It's kind of like the Goldilocks analogy that I use, is that you want to make sure that, are you building the right feature set for the most common user base? Is the right temperature, the Goldilocks, is it too cold, too hot, or perfect? And it's awfully hard with assumptions. It's not easy. We're not going to make it easy, but you need to kind of think through that, and make your bets where you make your small bets first, because you're going to get feedback. Yeah. It's always easier to build something else than already built that you want to take away. The second scenario is costly, because I've overbuilt, I've invested, and now either I have to scale it back or do something else based on customer feedback. And I've seen that a lot, back to what you mentioned earlier about over-featured products, assuming the customer wants everything in the kitchen sink. So an approach of really starting with that novice or that first bite at the apple with your assumption, and stay with that, knowing that you might want to build upon that. But you're going to get that feedback right away, and you're going to use a better utilization of your investment dollars, because you're minimizing your assumptions and your bets to get feedback in the marketplace, which is critical, versus spending many development cycles and releases to maybe build something that is overbuilt and maybe not addressing the need. And you could actually use those dollars for something else. So that's so that's another reason why looking at your product assumptions and really minimizing them based on validation would help you not only achieve that product assumptions goals, but you might be able to do other things within your product that now you have the space, the time, and the investment dollars to do, because you're very diligent on your product assumptions.
So it seems like one of the first things you need to do is actually acknowledge to yourself, and then also to your stakeholders, that you have an assumption, right, that you're going to test, right? And even using the language of these are small bets that we're making. Can you talk about how that goes across when you're dealing with business stakeholders or with development teams?
Yeah, I think it's critical to start with that, with being very clear with development teams, but also with leadership and other people within your business and external customers, that these are assumptions, and this is the risk and bet with it. The reason why you want to go in there is that you want to make sure that you've articulated clearly the current risk of that product assumptions based on some criteria that, have I validated it? What's the value of it? And some other metrics, because then it gives everyone an opportunity to say, well, that's a small bet with good validation. We can do that maybe. But if you have another product assumption that has a larger bet and it has you don't have as much validation, it gives everyone an opportunity to say, well, can we break this up? What can we do to validate this? And it gives the product management team and the product the space. I keep saying space because they need that time to actually absorb that and be able to make right decisions. Jumping ahead and being fast and building something, because you can say, my metric is I'm building things as a metric, but I'd rather have a metric I'd rather be building something maybe smaller that's right, versus something that's fast and larger and has higher risk. So give it the product team and the product the space to do that, so you can move to that lower risk threshold of having smaller bets, validation, and right investment level, is critical.
Yeah. Yeah. And we benefit from the structure of the agile software process, right? The fact that that delivering working software is the measure of success, and that iterations are, typically a week or 2 weeks at the max, right? We can actually see the results of the things that we ask for every week or every 2 weeks, right? That's
Exactly.
a quick way to check assumptions.
Yeah, and then you've created a system of delivery and transformation that has that technical team where they can take those smaller, iterate and provide working software.
Mm-hmm.
What's important though is that the product management works like that, in line with that, using their product assumptions. Okay,
Yes.
it can't be waterfallish. They can say, "Well, here's my huge product assumption: is I want to just break it apart into stories."
Yeah.
Right? Okay, all you're doing is taking a very big bet product assumption, right? All right, with maybe little validation and high risk, breaking into stories that you think that minimize risk, but really they're all tied to the bigger product assumption. So yes, you're delivering stories to the team, but you're inherently at a point where aha moment. This is what happens in development, right? Aha is like 8 months later, you're like, well, we did build that feature iteratively, but we didn't really understand the customer assumption income. It took 8 months to actually validate because it was such a big assumption. All right. So what I'm saying is that you have to make sure that, and that's what I kind of articulated earlier about how you can create that product assumption inherently up front into a smaller bet. It's been validated. It has value on it. And then you figure out how you work with your technical team to actually deliver that solution iteratively. Inherently is going to give you the feedback loop quicker. And also, or like I said earlier, you're minimizing your investment in that product assumption, because each product assumption has investment dollars in it. So it's critical for making sure that, the product management assumption to the development works hand in hand and works together.
Right. The delivery team is responsible for breaking down work to drive out technical risk and complexity, but the product team is responsible for breaking down stories to drive out product assumptions, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And where by you looking at the product assumptions and saying, what's the value of this assumption? What's the risk of it? What's the validation of it? Allows the product team now to maybe slice and dice their product assumptions, or even eliminate some of them because they're not ready. All right. And that's critical. So then inherently you are at the point where you've done your work and you think this is the right bet with the right value, with the right risk and the right validation. Then you get the delivery team to do what their magic is, which is, okay, let's take this and break this down into the right technical work that delivers value quickly, and you can get feedback. But they're working together. So and that happens, and magic happens.
Yeah. Maybe we could give another example now, something that an aha from our past.
Yeah, I would say I have another example where I had the same situation where you have a client and their end users using our product, and this is the tricky situation, very similar to Librarian, and this happens a lot because usually you're selling your product to, or someone else is using your product for some other end user, and they would want to continually add marketing content and other information to the site, but wasn't the main purpose of achieving that goal. So it was mainly banking functionality. The customer's coming in with an intent to find out, I want to accomplish this goal. All right. And I want to focus that. Well, the partner was like, well, isn't that a great opportunity for us to do this? Because they're interacting with us. Right. So they would want to add marketing content or other actions. And even though they saw value in their business outcome, all right, the goal of the customer was, no, I want to pay my bill fast. I want to make sure it's completed and it's on time. Okay. Now,
Yeah.
after that event, let's talk about what to do next. All right. So so the idea of the product assumption that we want to use this as an upsell opportunity, and just plaster the website with all these different offers and information. That's their goal. But if you go talk to customers and you would show them a prototype, they would get confused and they would say back to the same thing. I want to accomplish my goal first, and then I'll go on to my next thing. So it took a lot of education to say, okay, we don't need to, the product assumption that, that we want the customer wants to know the next offer to buy, wasn't really relevant to what they want to achieve on their very specific goal there.
Yeah. Yeah. Websites are especially prone to that, right? There's the goals of the business as represented through marketing content and press releases and about us and all that is often very different from the needs of the customer who go to the website, right? Right. They want to reach out for help. They want to, know the status of their order. Yeah.
So if we've talked a lot about product assumptions, the types, some of the things that, why you'd want to, build them, how you interact with them, sources of information. What are some pain points you see overall, with product assumptions, and maybe we can kind of tie together some of the product assumptions learnings that we just spoke about and tie them some pain points that we have seen in businesses and other products.
Yeah. So we've talked about the cost factor as a big pain point, and I think another one that I think is really potentially heartbreaking for product teams and delivery teams is when you build features that people don't love and don't use, right? So you can invest a lot of time and energy as a product and delivery team designing something on an assumption. And then when you show it to representative users or you release it into the market, you discover that it gets very little attention, very little enthusiasm, kind of a blah response. So I think that's a particular pain point that comes from operating going too far with an assumption, is that you create essentially this dead space within your software or your application or your service, right? That has to be torn down or has to be reworked.
Yeah. It's I've had many examples where we would look at. That's what's critical about the assumptions to validate them is that metrics, and being able to say, that through my experience, you would look at pages on a website and say, and I'd find out that, if they had 10 pages, for example, keep it simple, they could have 80% of their traffic on page 1 through 3.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then 4 through 7, 10 has the remaining traffic and has different value. All right. So then understanding that, and that might be okay because with each one on a customer service page might not want to be hit all the time versus a buy page or an order page. However, by looking at those metrics, you get an idea of what's really the customer's needs are, and stuff. And having those metrics, making sure that, if it's a feature that you went out and it's unwanted or not achieving the goal, making sure that, upfront those metrics are there with the product assumptions. So then if something is wrong, and also then you can learn from it. If it's achieved, if an unwanted feature was the outcome, unfortunately, what are the lessons learned? It's like the retro of a feature, and some people don't spend time on that. So what you do, you make the same mistakes again. All right. So, and it's okay, but maybe you did some validation and it was wrong. Well, find out why it was wrong. Or maybe there was a lack of validation, or we just took the sales or the source, right, and ran with it. We heard that this is important to get in the marketplace, or we use the competitor, view. They have it, we need it. So just understand where that want from is important. Not just saying, okay, it's failure, all right? Failure is fine. That's part of Agile too. Remember, failure is fail quickly, succeed long term, right?
Yeah.
So unwanted features is a failure, but if you've done it in the right way with a smaller bet and with assumptions, maybe your investment isn't that bad. It didn't turn out correctly, but at least you went in with less skin in the game because of you did the upfront work. Because even everything else, it's not a perfect world, and you can spend all the time you want, and maybe it didn't work out.
Yeah.
But let's do a retro on that to figure out, because you're going to learn back, and maybe these other pain points become less evident, in your product development and to your customer. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think what you said points to the need for a certain amount of humility, right? Going into product development, which is that even if we do our research and even if we make good assumptions, we need to give ourselves some space and opportunity for learning, right?
Okay.
We're not going to write every story correctly the first time. It's not going to get implemented correctly always the first time. And if we wait until the end of our development effort to show what we've built to stakeholders, customers, end users, there's no opportunity to apply that learning. So that's another potential pain point of assumptions is waiting too late to check them means that you've run out of time and you've run out of budget to tweak them, right?
Right.
And sometimes even a small tweak can make a big impact on the outcome. But you wait too late because yeah, because you were holding the idea too close to your chest, right?
Right.
Then you miss out on the opportunity to really delight your customer.
All right. And that's the one of the most primary overarching themes
Mm-hmm.
with product assumptions and the pain points is, um, what I've heard from product teams and development teams is that we don't have the time to validate.
Yeah.
We need to start now.
Yeah.
Because this is my roadmap. This is what we need to build. And what you haven't done is, if that is the case of your organization, um, it's the work up front. All right. So just the cycles up front. So I'm planning and validating a quarter ahead and creating my product assumptions and creating the smaller bets to the team. So I'm funneling the backlog into a quality backlog that has all those attributes in there. So by creating a process or a cycle in the time, you can have the time. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
You just need to make sure that you created the environment and the culture and the expectation, okay, that, hey, this is not going to be built until it's ready. All right. And whatever that ready is might have the attributes. It has this much validation. It has this value in it. And it has this risk profile. All right. So having that information might help the team create the discipline. So then when we're funneling that work to teams, that they have that. So don't have time to build doesn't become a statement within the organization. They're just building the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's where product teams sometimes need to get ahead of the game, and have that space and breadth to do that. All
Yeah.
right. But it works well. And we're not talking about months. We're talking about quarter, months. I mentioned about because anything longer than that, usually the customer market changes too long. We're not talking about high level epics or very granular changes in markets or customers. We're talking about feature level assumptions, where, you're really doing that. So, that's where you're a quarter ahead of the team or less based on the complexity of the assumptions and how fast you can validate in the market. There's a lot of variables on that, but where you can really start funneling that information in that. And now you've created an environment where the product cycle time from, lead time, which is like, I have an idea, to when it's built, that's usually that's usually the longest length in a company when you actually evaluate a product. Because usually there's a lot of hurdles either at the end, in the middle, or at the beginning. So being able to create that ultimate lead time where I have an idea, I have an assumption, I validate it, and within a month, it's got those attributes that it's ready to build, and we build it.
Mm-hmm.
So now you've created this environment where your lead time is like industry leading or competitor leading or some other metric that really helps you differentiate your company from someone else.
Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely a measure of success, is how quickly you can check those assumptions, which means how quickly can you take an idea and test it with real end users or real customers, right?
Right.
Yeah. Is that a good point to sort of talk about, what we do within studios and how we do check assumptions? What
Yeah,
are
I mean,
our at our command?
yes, I think, we've just to refresh, we've kind of started the conversation understanding what assumptions are, what are some attributes of them, some of the risks or associated costs with the assumptions. We kind of moved into articulating some of the pain points that are related to those assumptions. Well, what can we do to help solve for these challenges and problems in our business?
Mm-hmm.
And one of the first things I can think about was we have a lot of assumptions, a lot of ideas. Most companies I've never heard of coming to that is a lack of ideas. It's what should we build, and when should we build it? Okay, and by providing maybe some metrics or some offerings, leading agile studios can come in and look at and provide you some type of methodology that allows you to maybe to look at your product assumptions and not just base it on just a feeling like we need to get this done because Salesforce, which is more of the art size, the science size is like, okay, this is just, we need to do this because everyone's doing this, or we need to mimic this. So there's ability to look at all your assumptions and maybe put some actual art and science decisioning around it, where you kind of like, not just at the value, but maybe you're looking at some type of business risk lever. And then also the third thing is like, what's my level of validation of that assumption? So by having those three different levers within that assumption will give you an idea of which ones are ready to build and which ones are at the point of acceptance, in the sense that had they passed the muster, like maybe if a certain value is there or size, I want more validation versus, well, if it's a smaller bet and a smaller risk, I don't need I can maybe do it a different level of validation, but it allows you maybe to sit there and look at your roadmap and feature levels within that roadmap you want to achieve and being able to say, what's my readiness to build? Where right now, a lot of times I've seen when you look at features list and assumptions, it will say, I want to do this. I expect this value and everything. Then we sort by value and we say, let's go do it. Okay. Because we want the biggest value, which is totally business outcome, but not understanding what does that value mean against maybe some other critical metrics of validation and risk will give you an idea of maybe what you should do build. And the final outcome of that is that you're making the appropriate level of product investment on that. So having this structure, which Lead an Agile Studio can help with your product team develop and partner with, will give you that runway. And at the ultimate course, that you can now have a very clear conversation with your development team, with your leadership, and also other business people, and even your external customers, and say, this is what we're doing. Okay. And this is why we're doing that. And we're ready for this, so it brings that emotion out of it, or just numbers. Remember, emotions is like a sales guy saying this is most important. And then if you're just using a value number, that's just like saying there's a value, right? And that puts a lot of risk on you too. So by having these different attributes really give you that methodology approach to really build out the right thing. It can be very simple, very quick, but very effective.
Totally agree. Yeah. That's very important to keep the emotions out of it, because everybody's got favorite features. Everybody's got opinions, but being able to having a value-based conversation is something that a lot of teams aren't used to, or even product teams. right? There's so much noise in the system from sales and customers and leadership that it's easy to get blown and tossed by the winds
Right.
of opinion.
Yeah, and with the studios, uh, we have years of experience working with different products, different markets, different types of products, business to business, B2C products, and this really helps, a company being able to communicate, which is the key thing of our roadmap and a product is communication, what we're building, and being able to articulate that in a very combination of art and science that people all understand, which inherently means that you're going to then being able to react quicker to the market because now you've created the infrastructure that allows you to pivot and change things, but make sure that that you're working on the right thing because you have the right controls in there. All right, they're
Mm-hmm.
simple controls, they're not overburden, but they're consistent and it allows you to make the right decisions quickly and get the feedback.
Agreed. Yep, that's a critical part of the process, and that regular sampling, that regular testing of the market, that regular feedback mechanism. There's a lot of different ways to structure it, but having it be continuous and having it be, having it get all the way to the end user and the end customer is critical.
Is there any other, if we talk about some solutions to help our
Mm-hmm.
customers save these pain points and assumptions, is there, what are some offerings that are maybe a good place to start?
Yeah, I think another one. So in addition to the feedback techniques, another key tool we have is the ability to prototype things. And the prototype can mean a lot of different things, but what we're specifically talking about within a studio's context is how can we create a realistic facade of a product, whether it's a software application or a website or a service. How can we create just enough to get a reaction from the end user or the customer without building everything behind it? So the mental model that I always share with people is you think about old school westerns, and when they needed to show a town, they would build the front of every building, right, and behind it would just be held up by wooden beams, and that's 10% of the building, but it gives you 90% of the experience when you shoot it on camera. You just need the facade, and that's true for software as well. If you can create the visual of a web page or an application and you show it to end users, you'll get a very realistic reaction to it because people can imagine how it might feel to use it. They can imagine what it would be like to click through it. So we use a variety of different design tools, even things as simple as PowerPoint and Pages or Keynote to create create prototypes, and you can go even more sophisticated with Photoshop and things like that. InVision is a common one, but we create. It's something that we can do as a product team, product manager, and customer experience that doesn't require technical investment. We can early prototype features, early prototype experiences. And test them before we ask our delivery teams to start building anything.
And that speaks to, as you move down the development product pipeline, everything gets more expensive. All right.
Mm-hmm.
So usually a product idea starts with very few people, product manager or some other involved. As you move down the product line to maybe doing design, you add a design element, a prototype, a very fast one, as you just described. You're adding a few people. And you have these opportunities to stop, change, edit. So then in the next phase, you get feedback. You're moving on to now, hey, now I might want to have a technical discussion, right? And then the technical people come in. And then maybe the feature needs operational impact. So now you're bringing the next phase would be is like they passes that. I need to talk to operations support or marketing to be able to do this stuff. jumping quickly as you go down the cycle, you haven't even built anything yet. By being able to have this process, product management, you're making sure that you're minimizing your involvement in multiple teams until it's necessary.
Mm-hmm.
All right, and that's good for the company overall because then you're focused on one outcome and to achieve that goal. So I think it's those are the attributes that we can kind of share with our client and understand related to what is the business case or the cost of your feature development. Because one of the other things that a studio can offer a client is some of them don't really understand what is my cost for development. And remember, it's not just the development team. The examples I provided of like, it's the product team, it's the customer experience team, it's maybe working with operations. So there's all these internal costs or other time that you haven't accounted for. So if you really understand, if I have an idea to build, what's my feature development cost on average, all right? It helps you understand now what's the payback of taking that time and space not to make mistakes or minimize mistakes, all right? Or make the mistakes smaller and not large. 9-month development, we found out we spent 9 months and multiple people. So having that number actually will help you understand feature development costs because now you have a metric to move against to say, the time and space to spend $30,000 on validation of the customer to save on an average of feature development cost of $500,000 seems very worth like an investment. All right. If you don't have that metric of what it costs to build overall, you have a tendency to say, I don't want to spend that $30,000. That's cost.
Right.
Versus I use it as an investment to minimize my overall cost. Because if I don't spend the $30,000, I might put in a $500,000 development feature bet on the table. But by having an understanding that, it becomes open for giving that product team that space I talk about to actually do that product validation, that customer prototyping that might take 2 weeks. Well, we don't have time for 2 weeks. Well, yes, we do. Because if I don't take this 2 weeks to do this prototyping, we might spend 6 figures on building the wrong thing. Versus spending 2 weeks of $10,000 to make sure we buy it. And we actually might not even build it. Remember? So that I also, figuring out what you shouldn't build is as successful as building the right thing. Because now you've actually taken the time and saying, I shouldn't have done this.
Right.
And, and our metrics are saying always on what you want to, if your metric or there's a team assessed on how much they're building versus building the right thing, that's the wrong metric. All right. And you're going to get the wrong behavior, the outcome.
It's measuring outcomes rather than inputs, right?
Yeah.
If you just measure the amount of stuff built or the amount of hours spent, you're not really measuring something that has business value as opposed to customers gained, feature usage, right? Revenue. Yeah. The outcomes are much more important than the inputs.
Yes. And having that information. So from a studio offering, being able to provide them, an approach of where they can evaluate assumptions across multiple accesses or ideas, not just value or not just about the loudest person in the room, being able to understand the cost of development. So then you can actually articulate why it's important to have these critical validation or risk steps or understanding, where my investment dollars are. Combination of those really provides the team the safety, the framework, and the understanding to the development team, to leadership of why they're doing stuff and what the expected outcome is.
That's great. So we've talked through what are product assumptions and why are they dangerous, right? They're not exclusively dangerous. There are places for them in the process, but only if they are early and if they are then checked or tested or validated. We've given some examples of different product assumptions both general assumptions or traps that we fall into, as well as some specific examples. And then the ways that we do address assumptions, right? By iteration, by testing, by prototyping, and by looking to outcomes rather than just the inputs. Anything you want to add to that, David?
Yeah, I think product assumptions, as we stated at the beginning, are inherently human. We have to start somewhere.
Yep.
And we're not saying that product assumptions will always exist.
Yep.
All right. What we are providing from a studio's offering perspective is that how can we help you with your product assumptions to create the biggest value with the lowest risks and the highest level of validation, so your bet achieves your business outcome. And having the process, the space, and the safety to do that creates a very magical, high-powered product development team. Because now you've kind of linked in not just the agile development process of taking stories and breaking them down and getting iterative feedback. You've linked those really into the product development cycle too, inherently, and have all those attributes of smaller bets, validation, and value and risk, and tied with the development. And with that, actually becomes a rapid product development cycle and best in class.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's the emotional switch from the oops, we built the wrong thing, to the wow, that really hit the nail. This is really what customers wanted, right? The aha moment and the satisfaction of a job well done, when you have checked your assumptions and you've built something that end users and customers really crave.